afternoon and welcome to this webinar from IOSH magazine in partnership with EHS software provider EcoOnline. In today's webinar, we'll look at how to use ISO 45003 to manage and protect the psychosocial well-being of staff. Research carried out by OSHA found that only 20% of European enterprises inform their employees on psychosocial risks or work-related stress, let alone take action to tackle these issues. I'm delighted that we've got such a strong lineup of experts with us today who will discuss how the new global standard can help you manage and protect the well-being of your workforce, an area which is obviously so significant following the untold damage to employee mental health and well-being post-pandemic. So welcome to Sally Swingwood, Lead Standards Development Manager at the British Standards Institute. Sally managed the ISO Technical Committee responsible for ISO 45003. Ivan Williams-Jimenez, Policy Development Manager at IOSH. Ivan has a strong background on international labour standards and corporate social responsibility. Carlila Gaia has been an environmental health and safety consultant for over 20 years, so has lots of experience, and she's CEO, founder and principal consultant at EHS Compliance Services Incorporated. And finally, leading today's discussion is Dara Gagan, CEO of Engage EHS, now part of EcoOnline. So I'm going to hand over to Dara to start the discussion.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here today and delighted to have such a great panel. As Kelly outlined, I think ISO 45003 has been launched now as a guidance standard to sit alongside 45001. So while not an accredited certification, it is intended as a framework for businesses of all sizes to guide them in the assessment and mitigation, I think, of psychosocial risks. So today, really, we want to just talk to the panel, get some insight into the standard, some ideas around implementing that and how that might work, and just have a general discussion around how this can both help you and your business, in terms of providing those services to employees. So, just before we launch into some questions with the panel, we might launch a quick poll just to get some feedback from you guys listening in today. So, if I do this correctly, I'm going to say ask a poll, and hopefully you guys have a poll there that you can interact with. So, we're just going to try and get a little bit of feedback from you guys listening in terms of where you're at in terms of your own well-being and the mental health programs, and then we'll have another poll a little bit later on and go through the discussion. So, really over to the panel. We're going to start maybe with the first question and a little bit of background, I guess, and just start with why the standard is needed in the first place. What areas it's looking to address, and really what brought this about. So we might start with Van, if that's okay, and maybe just get your take on where this is coming from and why it's needed.
Sure, thanks. First of all, colleagues at IOSH Magazine and EcoOnline for this opportunity. And I think that from our perspective, it's true that the COVID pandemic has clearly exacerbated the existing workplace mental health and well-being issues. But we've also noticed that on the positive side of things, it has also evidenced how there is an ample room for improvement in this particular field, creating the business case for employers to take a more holistic and structured approach to how workplace mental health and well-being is managed. So I guess it is fair to say that from an organizational perspective, we know that for many years that focus has been much on work-related stress, and probably more recently on depression and anxiety and mental health as outcomes. But what we now know is that this new guidance, together with other like-minded trends, will definitely help to support the shift from mental health disorders to the so-called work-related contributing factors. And here we mentioned things like poor leadership and culture, and excessive work of hours, bullying and harassment, and so on.
Absolutely, great. And we might maybe, Sally, just get you in on that discussion. And is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of how wide these issues are, in terms of what we're trying to address, or any of the maybe cultural differences that we had to be thought about as this was developed out?
Oh my goodness, there's a lot of cultural differences to talk about, but perhaps it's worth sort of starting by the fact that even before the pandemic, this was a huge issue. I mean, in the UK, in the year before the pandemic, more than half of days lost through sickness were mental health related. Something like 17.9 million days lost in 2020, and that, of course, has only got worse. But on the upside, as Ivan was saying, something has shifted because of the pandemic. We're now talking about it more. Organisations are realising that actually they do need to address it, and it isn't just about doing nice wellbeing exercises like yoga classes, healthy eating. That actually the more fundamental, the core things do need looking at because they are really impacting on things, and that might be different impacts in different parts of the world, different stresses depending on the context you're working in. It is going to be different, and the different cultures also make a difference in how well people feel able to talk about it. So that's one of the things that the guidance is going to try and address, is place the importance on that cultural change and building a trusting, safe environment where it's okay to talk about psychological health, about stress, about depression, about not being able to cope or feeling burnt out, any of those things, that it becomes normal, the way you would talk about having a cold, you know? That's where we need to get to, and hopefully those guidelines will help with this.
And I mean, look, I think you pointed out this isn't pandemic-led. It's not here because of the pandemic. But do you think that there is that kind of seismic shift now, or at least some kind of wave of change coming, because it seems more okay to talk about these things now? Everybody's talking about them. People are more aware of them. Have you seen that shift?
Absolutely. I think there is a huge shift going on, and I wouldn't say that every organisation in the world's there yet. Plenty of people are still in crisis mode because of the pandemic and economic downturn and the rest of it. But I think employees are feeling empowered to raise conversations, to start conversations. And this guidance is going to actually then give the employer some tools on how to tackle it and how to deal with it. So I think there is a massive shift. Just the level of interest in the standard is showing that.
And Kalila, you're joining us from Texas, so you can bring us in some perhaps cultural differences that may be there in terms of implementing this or dealing with it. Have you got anything to bring in there in terms of where you've seen the need for this, or even any stories around businesses and how you think this will help?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished panel. And yes, so I am U.S. focused, and so here in the U.S., serious mental illness causes about $193 billion in lost earnings each year. And depression and anxiety disorders cost the global economy about $1 trillion. And so when we think about a bottom line impact, that is definitely there as well. And then about 80% of people that die by suicide are of working age. And so the workplace can have a really significant impact in reducing those risks if we as organizations begin to identify them. And so I think, to Sally's point, that yes, this guidance document gives employers a way to systematically address psychosocial risks in the workplace. Now, to the cultural differences, here in the States at least, there are some huge disparities around mental health care and access to it. So as an example, Asians are about 51% less likely to have access to health services from a mental health perspective than whites. Latinos are about 25% less likely, and Blacks are about 21% less likely than whites to have access to mental health care. There's a lot of reasons for that. Sally alluded to some stigma around mental health care, but as we begin to embrace this as organizations, we can impact that stigma. We can decrease that stigma so that not only are people talking about it in the workplace, but that we are, as organizations, having a positive and proactive impact in people getting the health care and assistance that they need.
I think that's, look, there's some very poignant points there, and I think obviously companies embracing this and making sure that it's delivered across all geographies and all departments and all people is going to be hugely important to demonstrate that. Okay, and in terms of maybe bringing back to the overview, just a little bit of history around the origins of the standard. Sally, maybe if you could come in and just kind of give us some history around that, what's happened with the framework directive, and kind of what's got us to this point in terms of the framework that's been launched.
Sure. This is a standard that the International Committee has wanted to write for a lot of years. Even when we were beginning ISO 45001, we were talking about this standard. But we made the decision to get that requirements framework in place before we moved on to this, because there was still a real lack across the globe of that basic framework for general occupational health and safety. But we always recognised that psychosocial risk was an area of occupational health that just is neglected. It's historically been neglected. It's seen as difficult. People don't understand it. People in many organisations didn't really understand how much it impacted, how that it had more impact really than many of the physical issues that they were addressing because they knew how to address. So yeah, it goes back a long time. It's certainly pre-pandemic. I think we were first talking about it in 2013, so a long time pre-pandemic. And then, of course, in the committee, once we had 45001 established, we set up a working group. We had around 35 countries, I think, actively involved in drafting it. 60, 70 experts contributing to the drafting and improving. Lots of opportunities for comments. So many iterations. I think we had 5 working drafts before we put it out to public consultation. So there's been a lot of build-up to get to where we are, and lots of negotiations, because people approach the subject differently in different parts of the world. So reaching that compromise where we could all agree that this is good advice, that we can all support, took time. I mean, it's why it took 3 years in the end. But I think what we've got now is our international committee, and there's 100 countries voting to approve it ultimately. Everybody is satisfied that what we've produced is a useful document and that it is accessible. I mean, standards always have a certain language issue, because we have to get language that can be translated into as many countries as there are languages in the world. So it has to be unambiguous. But what we tried very hard to do was make it simple so that it's accessible to anybody in any organisation.
I think that's essential for any implementation like this, right? It has to be easy, it has to be simple to do, and I think that's something we might touch on when we talk about who this is aimed at, and I think it's aimed at everyone really is the simple answer to that. But interestingly, actually, as we look at the poll that was published, the first poll, we have 60% of the audience where the companies have already invested in some form of wellbeing or mental health program. So obviously the intent is there and the engagement is there, I think, from a lot of companies, which is really good to see. So if we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about why should companies implement 45003, like you said, it's there alongside 45001. It's non-accredited. What are the benefits do we think we see from this? If we're looking at the real world benefits for companies, or we're thinking about the employee benefits that come from this. Kalila, maybe we'll start with you. Just where do you see this as really sort of driving benefit for the EHS professionals listening and the businesses that they work for their employees?
Well, thanks for asking. I think, as I alluded to, depression and anxiety are such a huge impact to businesses. As we begin to include them in our risk assessment processes and begin to decrease that risk, we can see a improvement in workplace productivity. Absenteeism is typically affected by depression and anxiety. And also presenteeism. So people are there, but they're not really engaged in the work. And so that's going to be a direct impact to the productivity of organizations. Another thing that we've noticed, at least here in the States, and I think this is really across the globe, that investors are really looking at how organizations are addressing material risks as a whole. So not just physical implications to the health and safety of workers, but also those psychosocial risks that can compound physical risks. And when they act in concert, there's this synergistic effect where you have a mental or psychological impact with workers that may be dealing with high hazard work, and then you have this synergistic effect where you can really have more serious injuries. So helping workers and organizations address that from a system standpoint will be really impactful, not only to productivity, but to how workers feel engaged in the workplace and how they feel cared for. So those are just some of the direct benefits. And I also think, to the point of stigma, as we begin to integrate this into the workplace, it will really become something, as Sally mentioned, that is as typical or as common as the common cold, that we can have discussions around mental well-being in our workplace so that that stigma is significantly reduced, and again, people can get the help that they need, and that workplaces can promote well-being as opposed to negatively impact it.
Sounds like a nice place to work when all that's when all that comes together. Van, do you have anything there to put in or not, just in terms of where you see the benefits, for businesses really investing in this and pushing this forward?
No, I absolutely agree with Galila, and this is also something that we are exploring at IOSH. We're seeing how, other fields such as human capital management or corporate social responsibility also tend to tackle some work-related psychosocial risks. So, as Galila was saying, the investor case and the leadership case for this to happen is becoming like more evident than ever. But I think what basically the standard says that it is important that psychosocial risks are managed in a manner consistent with other OSH risks, occupational safety and health risk. And this can be carried out through the lens of a risk management approach integrated into the organization's broader business processes. So for that reason, businesses really need to incorporate this risk within their strategies and into their existing management systems if they have in place and business operations. And I think this is something quite critical because the workplace well-being area has never gone through this kind of like structural approach. So you were guys mentioning existing of those superficial initiatives, companies or professionals going through different initiatives in relation to probably first physical well-being and more recently mental health and well-being as well. But I think within the working group we've advocated for a risk-based approach to managing this risk. So not really differentiating the so-called safety risk from the mental risk. So it should be a part of the governance process.
No, absolutely, and I think having that holistic view to governance and like you said, it's something that's more and more now being talked about at board level, but also investor level. Public companies talking about it, their future plans for CSR and how they're doing it. So I think, as you said, it's becoming more and more to the front of every level of business development.
And there, I think that's something that we've also noticed as part of the working group. So we've had colleagues from different backgrounds. So some of those from the human resources field, others from a OSH technical perspective, auditors, consultants, those more in relation to legal compliance or regulation, and then like occupational health experts as well. So I think we managed to get all that knowledge together, and we basically tried to have some great comprehensive guides.
Fantastic. Sally, would you add anything in there, just in terms of the benefits and what companies should be focused on?
Thank you. I've just pressed something. My screen's gone very strange. Apologies.
Still here. It's okay.
I think one of the things that it's always worth coming back to is what Kalila pointed out, that it's costing our economies over $1 trillion a year to not manage this. So
no investor is not going to be aware of those costs, right?
Many organisations haven't been aware of just how much financial financial cost there is. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of putting people first in your organisation, because you're not going to be successful in your organisation if you don't look after your people. And that means looking after their psychological health and managing out those risks. And that's what this standard can help you do, is recognise where risks can come from, and then you can do something about them, rather than going, oh my goodness, our HR specialists or our OHS specialists are not psychologists. The point of the standard is you don't need to get to the point where you need those psychologists if you can manage out the risks in the first place. So that's why I would say people should use it.
No, look, I think that's a very valid point, and one we might kind of maybe even elaborate on a little bit more if we can, because I think a lot of the people that are listening today, EHS professionals, it's probably this kind of program, it'll involve multiple departments, it'll involve HR, it'll involve EHS, but a lot of our listeners would be EHS professionals, and it's probably fair to say that a lot of them would not have typically been focused on psychosocial risk, would not be perhaps confident or very experienced in dealing with mental health issues. And I think sometimes people think, okay, if this is going to be my responsibility, now I have to have a certain level of knowledge around mental health or be able to treat mental health issues, and I think that's probably something that had to be considered as part of this. So I think it would be good to maybe just get some ideas from the operational side of things for those EHS professionals listening. How does the standard help for the non-trained psychosocial risk or psychologists, for people that aren't trained in that area? How does this how is this going to help us implement that, or the kind of structures that it puts in place to make sure that we can really kind of help the employees without that level of experience? So maybe Kalila, do you want to take a first stab at that one?
Sure. Well, as an EHS professional and consultant, that's something that I do each day. And it wasn't something that I was really doing, to Sally's point and Yvonne's point. Like, it wasn't something that I was incorporating in the work that I do every day. But as the pandemic progressed and it became really evident that mental health and well-being needs to be addressed as a part of this H part of environmental health and safety. In the past, it really focused on industrial hygiene and exposures, but really looking holistically at these risks is an opportunity for us as EHS professionals to break down silos in our organizations. It's so beneficial to help us drive this through the organization when we engage other parts of the business. So it's a great time to talk to our human resource professionals. It's a great time to engage mental health professionals, whether those are therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists. I have a psychiatrist that I work with, as well as a licensed mental health care professional, to really understand those impacts. And in the event that something comes up that I am not capable of dealing with, then we have those professionals that we can leverage at our disposal. And to Sally's point, if we are getting in front of these risks and preventing them and managing them before they become, incidents or crises for people, then we hopefully don't have the need for the psychologists and the mental health professionals. But when we do, again, it's great to engage them and to have them a part of the discussion from the onset. So incorporating those into our existing risk assessment processes with the help of these augmenting departments can really help us have a more holistic program. It's not about us becoming the experts, but it is about us using the systems that we already have in place to identify and reduce those risks.
I think a hugely important point around the relevance of being proactive rather than reactive in something like this, and obviously the more you can mitigate early, the far better everyone's going to be around it. Absolutely. Okay, maybe Sally, over to you. Is there anything there that you'd talk about? I know, certainly when the BSI side, I believe this is a free-to-read standard, so it's available and accessible to everybody for all businesses. So I think that's a huge positive in terms of helping people implement. Anything else that you kind of look at that around, guidance or some tips for any of the people listening?
Well, I think I'd say it's free to read on the ISO site under their COVID offering, which I think is a really good initiative, because it means that people all over the world can just bring it up, read it, learn. And BSI is also offering small businesses the opportunity to download it for free through the BSI shop in the UK. So, that kind of takes away that issue of we're struggling economically at the moment. We've had a really tough 18 months. How can we afford to do this? Well, there's no cost for you to actually read and learn. And I would say everybody should read it. Employees should read it. Learn how to advocate for yourself. Learn how to identify where issues might be coming from that are affecting you, so that you can have those conversations with your manager, with your health and safety professionals, with your HR department. Because the more information all of us have got, we need to do this together. It's, one person isn't going to fix everything for a whole organisation. It's got to be a collaborative event, and the standard really does talk a lot about the importance of worker participation. Everybody needs to get involved in this, and leadership, the people right at the top, have to be seen to be supporting it. They have to be committed to it, and they need to not just talk about it, but actually be seen to do, because otherwise we're not going to change anything. But all of the experts are predicting this tsunami of mental health issues over the next 5 to 10 years. If you're the kind of organisation that's still thinking this is pink and fluffy and not my problem, I think you're going to find it is your problem, because people aren't just going to bounce back from this pandemic. Many people won't, and there were people suffering before it, so it's only got worse. I just think it's almost crazy not to read it at this moment in time when we are really facing a crisis in mental health. And there's lots of external factors, home, public health, all the rest of it, social, political, environmental factors that's causing a lot of anxiety. But we bring those to work, doesn't actually have to be, but work can be a safe place. It can be a place that helps our mental health. Whereas if we're adding ridiculous workloads, work pace, conflicting deadlines and bullying cultures to it, you're probably tipping people over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, maybe even over to you. I know when we spoke briefly before, you talked about the importance of kind of measurements for improvement. So if you're going to set metrics, you have to be able to measure things and improve things, and give yourself baselines to work from. Is there anything from that side that you might bring into the conversation for the people listening as well, when you think about the 45,003 or the mental health elements of their risk assessments and mitigation plans?
Sure, thanks, Darren, for that question. It is true that one of the things that we detected as part of the working group was, first, the lack of organizational or wider awareness within workers and employers, and then as both Kalilia and Sally were mentioning, the appropriate expertise or capacity building within not only health and safety professionals, but I would probably say people-related professionals, really. So these also include human resources and other professionals that tend to really focus on the people and aspect as such. Another important issue, as Sally was mentioning, the buy-in from leaders and managers. So you really need that kind of like a broad-based and visible leadership support in place. Otherwise, you could have, the most competent OSH professionals, but you don't have that level of support of that kind of collective action. Your system will never work. And then, as you were mentioning, metrics. Reporting metrics on health and well-being has been like a long-standing issue for health and safety practitioners and companies as well. So I do think the guidance and standard somehow helps with that aspect. As we were saying, it definitely sits under the umbrella of ISO 45001 that also puts a strong focus on metrics. And evidence of the impact of these kind of initiatives need to really be better measured and reported. So I would probably say that special attention really needs to be placed to those investments that have the potential really to create like a positive impact. And as we were mentioning, I mean, respectively of the size or sector of the business. For a retail sector, their area of focus could be one, and then for like a finance related company, it could be another one. So yeah, having that kind of like reporting metrics in place, I think is really like a no-brainer. So it is true that I think we believe that additional efforts really need to be geared towards determining which interventions tend to provide the highest returns to the company. Because for some companies it could be just like some minor steps, having like a health and well-being champions, but for others would probably require like a more complex program or resources in place.
Very good. And it looks, as you've all pointed out, I think the importance of executive sponsors or senior level engagement, that in itself can start to build out metrics of are my senior managers engaging in these discussions? Are they engaging with the standard? Are the employees engaging in a way that can be kind of tracked? Which is again where things like software systems and stuff can come in to track those engagement levels. So even some basic level metrics, I think you could look to build in very quickly to say how much of an impact are we getting through the employee engagement levels or managerial engagement levels, and driving those discussions throughout the organisation. A lot of the times that can come down to financial incentives like bonuses are built off of participation in these things for senior managers. So there's different ways, I guess, that can all be structured to help them implement change at least.
And Dara, I'd like to add, one of the things that we kind of talked about earlier is that people don't feel that, or since this is a new and emerging issue, that a lot of professionals around the organization might feel like, okay, we need to have a higher level of literacy around these issues. So as a start, some literacy training, some competence training can be the first level of engagement and metrics, like how many people have awareness level training, and even including some peer groups that have a higher level of training, like mental health first aid or some similar training, can also be a place where we can begin that journey. Just starting with some training for our workers so that people feel confident and they have a language to use when we're speaking about psychosocial risk that is across the organization. So that's a great place to start if you haven't even engaged in this conversation at all as an organization.
No, that's great. And I think the key words there, across the organization, I think where people have got caught on, mental health first aid is one person in an organization or two people, whereas this really, the importance is we engage everybody in this. We get everybody that we can, from frontline workers, managers, senior level, to engage in this process, right? Same as any significant organizational change. Very good. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we might move to our Q&A. We have quite a considerable backlog, so we'll do our best to get through what we can. Interestingly, the second poll that we did send out was just asking around people's intent in terms of implementing 45,001 or using it as a general framework to implement some improvement plans. So we can see there's 15% are kind of committed already to implementing 45,003, and we have another 54% who are going to use it as a framework. So from the audience there, we've got a kind of nearly 70% of the audience listeners do intend to do something here and bring this forward in their organisation. So that in itself, again, is a very positive metric of the importance and the impact that this could have, which is great. Okay, so we're going to look for some questions. Is that me or is that Kelly? Kelly, am I doing questions? I'm going to keep talking to there's Kelly.
Hello. Yeah, we've had lots and lots of questions, and I'm still going through and prioritising them. So you're very welcome to go pick some if you want to, Dara, to ask the panel, or...
Let's do that. We'll start off with a few that we're working through. No problem at all. So, given that a framework for psychosocial risk management was put forward in 2008 by Stavrula Lika and Tom Cox, why has it taken so long for professionals and organisations to come to grips with the importance of this? Maybe but let's see if we can touch on that. Sally, you look ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, and Stavrula was one of the project leaders on this. So I think it's just what I was saying before. We wanted to make sure the general framework for requirements for a management system for all aspects of health and safety were in place before we put this together. That's all it is. We knew that there was the publicly available specification available already in the UK, and that could have been used by anybody, and also there's a Canadian national standard, and both those standards were used as seed documents to the international standard.
If I can quickly add to that one, as Sally was mentioning, the current standard really relies on those two key, on the foundations of those key documents. So we know that the management of work-related psychosocial risk through a management system approach is everything but new. But what we are seeing is that this guidance, together with other measures, can really help having, like a real robust approach. And we're now seeing that in countries such as Canada or Australia that are leading the way. Not only from a business perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. They are developing guidance, updating guidance on mental health and well-being aspects. So I think this kind of more integrated approach from the different key players is essential.
So here's an interesting one, I think. So as with any other accreditation, I'm aware of the benefits. And besides helping companies to build a better, to build a better work environment, the accreditation obtained is usually through peer pressure. So this is a common discussion and a common debate of, do I get my ISO certification to make things better, or do I get it because it helps me get jobs or tick a box for a contractor? But I suppose the underlying question here is, with clients, when you get to an ISO accreditation, why introduce an accreditation when there are laws? So I guess really, why are we doing this? We kind of touched off this in the first one, but I think it's probably worth reiterating the value. I think, and yes, there are laws to protect employees, but the laws don't necessarily build a framework for better management. Would that be fair, or does anyone else want to make that up?
I think that is fair, but I think it's also worth remembering that not every country has laws. Some countries have no laws at all. So this framework can help people implement better practices, regardless of whether there's a legal framework or not, and help you go beyond those basic legal requirements. 'Cause legal requirements are often quite low, and we all deserve better than that, and that's what standards help us do, is raise that bar.
Yeah, we shouldn't accept the minimum. Anyone else like to add to that?
And just to add to Sally's point, I think even where there are laws, again, there's not a framework. And with this particular guidance document, it really helps you leverage your existing risk assessment process, which a lot of organizations already have. And so maybe it's just a tweak to the current existing risk assessment process, especially for those organizations who have already used 45001 to set their occupational health and safety framework. It kind of gives you a guidance to deal with these mental health and psychosocial risk factors and incorporate those in your already existing program. Or if you don't have a program, it kind of gives you a place to start if you're interested in following the framework. But you don't have to use it to become accredited. It really can be used as a guidance, as a gold standard to incorporate these things into your system, but you don't have to go for accreditation, but it is a way to follow a standard to proceed with addressing those risks as well.
Another one here from Jason. So Jason works in construction. We've already started on working towards a better mental health for our workers on site. How will the new ISO help our companies going forward? Will the framework of ISO help us respond better, or will it hinder us from being flexible? Any thoughts on that?
I think that there's a general understanding that when it comes to managing psychosocial risk, it could create like an additional burden, not only to professionals, technical professionals, but to businesses as such. But as we've seen in this webinar and other similar webinars, you do have the business. Nowadays, we do have the business case for that to happen. So from my perspective, you really need to tailor your approaches to your particular sector. In this case, if we're talking about the construction and the complexities associated to your own organization, and that could relate to supply chain management issues, or we've also been talking about diversity and race issues. So it could relate to having like a migrant workforce, composition of your workforce being migrant workers. So that could be another issue. So you really need to adapt that approach to your own very own context.
And I think it's worth adding that the standard isn't something prescriptive. It's really flexible. It gives lots of examples. It gives you direction. It signposts things, but it isn't telling you there's one way to do things. So anything you've got in place, just work with it. It shouldn't need to be new if you've got something in place. It can augment it. It can help you perhaps shine a light in corners that you didn't realise, there's risks there. That's all.
Read it, learn it, and hopefully take some new things to implement along with whatever you're doing right now already to make it better.
Absolutely. And the risk assessment piece of this, to Yvonne's point, is really to prioritize what's going to have the best impact or the most benefit for your organization. So that prioritization piece of the risk assessment process is really to float to the top the things that are going to be most helpful for you. So that will really be dependent upon what your industry is, what your workplace culture is, what your leadership is interested in, and what's going to give you the most bang for your buck.
Perfect. So here's another one. We'll keep going until we've hit our time limit at least, and then there might be some questions to follow up. Sally, you touched on this in terms of the number of external factors and other things that really do kind of impact obviously on mental health, and people bring that to work. So there's a question here maybe worth a few minutes of conversation. So how does a business determine whether an employee health issue is triggered through work activity or through personal non-work related concerns? And maybe a controversial question here, but why should the employer pick up this burden if the issue is not caused through the workplace?
They should pick up on the issue because it's going to affect your workplace. Doesn't matter how it's triggered. If you've got an employee who is distracted about some external issue, or anxious or angry or stressed or anything, they're going to bring that to work, and it is going to impact their performance, and it's going to impact how they interact with other people, which can make other people stressed and distracted and angry. So, we are human beings. We're not one person at home and one person at work. We don't, if we're having a terrible time at work, we take it home. And the same is true the other way around. So the standard is only looking at the things the organisations can have some control over. But if they take control of those things, then employees who are stressed from external sources are going to cope better, because it's not going to be built on in the workplace. So you're going to have, it can be a safe space, as I mentioned before. It can be a place where actually this is the place where your stress levels go down, so you're better able to deal with everything else. But equally, you don't want to make it worse, because it's going to affect how good your work is.
The other thing I think I can add is that as much as we spend as organizations on acquiring good talent, we want to make sure that we're keeping our talent. And so from the standpoint of caring for the whole worker, if organizations can do that, that is a competitive advantage. And I don't know in the UK if this is an issue, but I know in the States we're having a significant shortage of workers. And so thinking about what is going to differentiate your organization from your competitor as far as talent retention and talent recruiting is definitely another thing that organizations can benefit from. If workers come to the workplace and feel that I am cared for as a whole individual, my workforce or my management cares about my mental health and my physical well-being, and this is not a place where I'm further stressed, but a place where my stress load decreases, to Sally's point, then that is definitely going to allow people to come to work and be fully engaged and want to remain a part of your organization.
Absolutely. Let me see. There's plenty more questions. I'm trying to see which ones are. There's lots of questions going on around where can we get access to things. I think we've touched on that throughout the presentation already. So we can get access from the BSI site, Sally, that's correct, and then also from the ISO site.
If you want to read it for free, go to the ISO site, onto their COVID-19 page, and there's a link in there for you to read it for free. All of the standards bodies across the world sell it to some extent, and there's various initiatives to get it lower cost or free, but ISO, free to read. Go there first.
Medical legal issues and disclosures. Anything that we interested in thoughts around the disclosure in the US? Is the US in particular a specific question? I know in the US and Germany there are legal issues around disclosure of mental health. What's the approach to overcome some of those concerns in a global strategy? So if you're looking at a unified global mental health approach, anything you can do to overcome those obstacles?
Well, that's an interesting question.
We're going to go to you first.
Well, I know in the U.S. there are quite there's a lot of complexities around that, so I don't want to speak for the global issue because that is not my expertise. But in the U.S., a lot of companies do have employee assistance programs or EAP programs, which is a great benefit for employers to offer. One of the things that workers can think about is if the workplace is part of the stress, there is not really a protection from the employer or the protection from the employee. The employer can get information about your mental health from that EAP program. So if the workplace is causing some of those stresses, then it might be beneficial for that individual to seek help outside of the EAP program. So that is not protected from a HIPAA standpoint, but when we talk about mental health in the workplace and those protections that would exist, if we have mental health first aid or mental health peer support, those do need to be protected. And so we will have to implement some confidentiality around information on employees' confidential medical records. But when we're talking about assessments and focus groups, we are talking generally, not necessarily specifics of one or two individuals. So when we have work surveys, we want to look holistically at those issues that are affecting the workplace, not one-offs per se, but really as an organization, where are the places that are highest risk for us? So if we see diversity or inclusion or bullying or workplace violence as corporate issues, then we can tackle those as corporate issues, not necessarily as one or two or three individuals that are struggling with specific things. Yes, they do still need help, and those would be addressed under HIPAA and those confidentialities. But as an organization, we want to talk about bigger issues that can move the organization forward from the standpoint of psychosocial risk management. So hopefully that answers that a little bit.
If I can also jump in, I think it's fair to say that the standard has a really strong prevention emphasis. So while we've been talking about issues in relation to anxiety and depression, I think the standard really focuses on the work design and organization and social factors. So not really on that treatment or compensation stage really. So we're basically encouraging professionals and employees and workers to sort of anticipate that risk and focus on the prevention side. And as Khalil was saying, in like EAP programs tend to be a great resource, and I think we've seen a hike in the availability of those programs within companies. But again, those companies or those support programs that need also to improve in terms of the metrics that they tend to use as well.
I think we are running over a little bit, but I'm never very good at time management. We'll do one more question and then we'll hand back to Kelly. So my company has just been approved to implement 45001, and this took a lot of persuasion. So any advice that you could give to help persuade senior managers of the company to try and also push 45003? I think we've touched on it's not going to cost you any more. That's obviously a good one for senior management, but is there anything else there that, I mean, and I guess this is a summary of all the key benefits that we talked earlier, but I mean, how would you do that in terms of if you had to sit in the C-suite and say, hey, Mr. MD, you should support this, what would you do?
You almost don't need to bring it up on one level because it should be part of your 45001 health and safety management system.
Okay.
Just use that as the tool for doing that part of your health and safety management system. I mean, if you need to do persuasion, use figures. People like talking money, you know?
Yeah.
It'll save you money. It'll stop people going off sick. It'll probably reduce your physical illnesses and accidents because you haven't got people who are not focused, you know?
Yeah.
There's plenty of ways to persuade people, but essentially you should have one management system that deals with all health and safety risks. So use 45003 to do that part of it.
So just do it and say nothing could be number one, or if you have to say something, use some numbers to support that. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the figures that we talked about here today, you know, around depression, around anxiety, and the impact not only to productivity, but to, you know, presenteeism, absenteeism, how managing these risks will improve productivity and impact the bottom line. So, you know, C-suite workers really want to understand, or C-suite leaders really want to understand, like, what is going to be the bottom line impact for my organization. And sometimes, and I speak as an EHS professional, we are not great at doing that. And so really beginning to be able to make the business case for implementing a mental health or psychosocial risk program in conjunction with your health and safety program. Because, you know, if you start talking about mental health, people are going to be like, well, this is different. This isn't something we've done in the past. So then you can begin to make the business case for including it as well. So those figures, percentages, dollars are really helpful as well.
And I think just building on that, Kalila, certainly in the UK, the longest sickness absences are down to mental health issues. Over 50% of sickness absences are down to mental health issues. So there's plenty of stats there. This is affecting your day-to-day work. That's why you should do it.
Untold. Evan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that we're conscious that this is not going to be an easy path for practitioners. I mean, having joining really the dots of workplace safety governance in conjunction with mental health and wellbeing governance is everything but easy. But for that particular reason, you really need, to improve in terms of capacity building and competence in this field. And that might not be something that some practitioners might feel interested in or feel comfortable. But as Sally was saying, I think this is a more collective exercise that shouldn't just be restricted to health and safety professionals, but to so many workers within the organization.
Great, thanks Ivan, and thanks Dara for leading the Q&A session. That is all we've got time for today, unfortunately. Thanks very much to the audience for sending in so many questions, and thanks to our panel for answering them so succinctly and getting through as many as possible, and for a really interesting session. It was great. This webinar will be available to watch on demand, so if any of our audience want to share it with your colleagues, please do. It'll be at ioshmagazine.com/webinars from tomorrow. So thanks again, Dara, Kalila, Sally and Ivan, and the team at Eco Online, and thank you to everybody who tuned in today. We look forward to welcoming you to another IOSH Magazine webinar very soon. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.